Well, certainly we've reached another nadir in U.S.-Chinese relations. The relationship has been up and down quite a lot over the past few years, mostly down since the Trump administration began imposing tariffs soon after President Trump's inauguration. Now, whether it's the worst that it's been since 1979 is another question, but certainly we're at a point now where relations are probably lower than they've been or worse than they've been at least for the last 2 to 3 years.
Charles, when you think about those early years, you think about table tennis, and this has been a lot like ping pong. We've seen these in the past with the tariffs, back and forth, tit for tat. How do you avoid this downward spiral of these back and forths, and what do you expect to see moving forward in regard to that?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think you're right. This is a tit for tat sort of downward spiral. Part of that is because of actions taken by the United States, and part because of actions taken by China. You know, as your reporter mentioned, looking at the Chinese side, you have the repression of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and you also, of course, have the conflict between China and India that's growing along the border there, and Chinese actions in Hong Kong, which have increased pressure and tension between the United States and China. On the American side, you have President Trump in an election coming up where it's looking like polling numbers are indicating that he's unlikely to win, or at least he's got a hard road ahead to win. And one of President Trump's strategies seems to be to blame China for the problems that the United States has experienced in controlling the coronavirus pandemic. Because, of course, coronavirus originated in China. It's an easy push, but the United States, of course, has not handled it well at all. The federal government has handled it quite incompetently, and so this is a way for Trump to kind of put the blame on someone else. So between the kind of increasingly aggressive foreign policies on China's side and President Trump's willingness and desire to push his own failures on coronavirus on the Chinese side, you have a recipe for a pretty troubled relationship.
Can relations improve before or after the election, do you think?
That's a very good question. My sense is relations are not likely to improve before the election. In the long run, I am an optimist. And the reason is that the United States and China need each other. They're deeply interconnected economically, as we all know. They are the 2 largest economies in the world. And so the 2 countries absolutely must find a way to cooperate. So right now we're in a down period, a nadir period. After the election, whether President Trump wins or loses, I think it's likely that whatever administration is there is going to need to pursue a Phase 2 trade agreement and start to improve relations with China.
The New York Times writes that these sanctions are likely to be mostly symbolic on both sides, and you heard Jim Spellman say that Ted Cruz doesn't have any plans to go to China anytime soon. It doesn't seem like people are jumping on planes right and left anyway. So what's the goal? What's the objective here?
Well, I think on the part of the United States, part of this reflects the nature of the American political system. The penalties that were imposed on the 4 senior Chinese officials for the repression in Xinjiang come out of U.S. law, which requires these sorts of penalties whenever there is ethnically charged human rights violations. My guess is that the Trump administration is relatively unhappy with imposing these right at the moment, or to the extent that it's okay with it, it's only because of its domestic political circumstances. President Trump has not historically been very much of a supporter of using American foreign policy to promote international human rights. So this is, I think, symbolic in that sense. From the Chinese side, China has long bristled at any attempts to comment on its internal affairs. And so responding as it has with these penalties on an equal number of American officials is simply its way to express its displeasure with American commentary on its internal decision-making.
Charles Hankla joining us from Atlanta. Thanks so much for your observation.